And we're back to learning to code, and this time I'm going to walk you through the second part of the freecodecamp curriculum. There's some HTML in it, but we are already introduced to the first CSS stuff. It's this building a cafe menu part in the first curriculum right here. So basic CSS is part of it. We'll just dive in, and this is the end result that we're going to create. The first steps is more like a repetition of HTML, and we've already covered that in the first walkthrough. If you haven't seen it, you'll find it in the description below in my playlist. So we'll start by adding this typical doctype HTML tag, and then we need an opening and a closing tag for HTML, which is always the basis for an HTML5 website. Also need a lang attribute with the value en, so that stands for language English. We'll add it to the HTML tag. Step 2. We need a head. This stuff that's not seen in the browser on the right hand side. So it's for meta information, and in this case also the title right here. It's given, it's cafe menu, so we add it right here. Once again, that's not stuff that's seen in the browser. This is when you hover over your tab, and it's also for search engines. Step 3. Here it is explained again that the title isn't seen, and we'll add our first meta information. What do we need? We need the char set, and it's UTF-8, which is also typical for most websites these days. So it's the character set that we're using, and UTF-8 that's typically used. What have I? There's my mistake. I have left a space between the char set and the equal sign, so sometimes you get confused by these minor mistakes. So UTF-8 was correct, char set was correct, meta also, but between char set and the equal sign we don't need a blank space. Alright, let's move to step 4. We also need a body, and this is actually the information that we're going to see in the browser. So the stuff that's going to be on the right hand side. And it has also an opening and a closing tag. Step number 5. We're going to add our first element to the body, which is going to be the H1, so our first heading. It's also given its camper cafe. And here it is. Step 6. Below the H1 we're going to add our first paragraph. It's this little text right here, established in 2020. And here it is with the default style for paragraphs in our browser. So we're going to nest this one in a header element. Don't mistake this for the head element. A header is part of the body, and in this case it gives us the heading and this established in 2020 paragraph. So it's simply the header of a website that you can see, and not the head where all of the meta information is. Step 8. We're going to add a main, which is just like the header. It's nothing that you see in the browser, but it's important to give your website structure, and it's also important for search engines. For now, we don't have any content for it, but we're going to add it in the next steps. Step 9. We're going to add a section to our main, so it's nested by this main. For now, it doesn't have any information. Step 10, we're going to add the information, in this case an H2. Usually websites should only have one H1, in this case it's Camper Cafe, or we can have multiple H2s, H3s, whatever we need. Step 11, and here's the first new element that we haven't talked about in the last walkthrough, and that's a style element. We can add it to our head, so here is the head. And we'll add it right here. If you're not sure if it is self-closing or should have a closing tag, just check your code. And here it says we need a closing tag. So style is not self-closing, and we'll add it right here. Step 12, we're going to add our first properties to our style element. And the way to write it is like this. So element, then we need these curly brackets, and we need the property and a value for it. Don't forget the semicolon at the end. And now we're going to give it extra information. Our element is the H1, so we're going to style this one. Property is the text-align, and the value is center. Watch on the right hand side what happens if I add the center value. You can see that Camper Cafe has now aligned to the center. If I get rid of this, it's aligned to the left, so which is the default alignment. And this is what all of his style stuff does. We can style our elements right here in the body with this information. And in this case, we are targeting the H1 element with the property text-align that has the value center. And this is basically how you write this CSS stuff. Sometimes they also use type selector as a name for this. Don't get confused by all of these new terms. If you use them often enough, you're going to understand what they mean. And in this case, we're going to repeat all of that a couple of times. So we're going to style the H2 now. This is our element. Once again, we'll align it, and we also do it to our paragraph element. It's always the same game. But you don't have to write it like this. It's much shorter if we just use commas between our selectors if they have the same property and values. So we'll get rid right here of the H2 and the P. We'll add it over here as it has the same property and value. You can see that instead of elements, the term selector is now used for these H1, H2 and P elements. It always depends on where you are. So in HTML it's elements, and in our CSS now the term selector is used. You can now jump around between the index.html and the style.css. So we're actually creating two files now. And we're going to get rid of the style right here in our index.html, and we're going to paste it in our style.css. In step 16, we're going to delete our style element in the index.html. And here it is already in the style.css. So let us get rid of all of it, even the style tags. And we'll move on to step 17, and now we'll have to link our index.html and the styles.css. And we can do that in the head of our index.html. And what we need is the link element for that. And it has an attribute called relation, so rel. The value for it is style sheet, so this is always a given. And we now can link it with the href attribute and a value. In this case it's the styles.css, so not style. If you just write it like this, nothing's going to happen. It needs to be the correct URL, in this case styles with an S. And then watch what happens. Now our style is linked to our index.html, and we can add further styles right here in our style.css instead of the head of our index.html. There's another line of code that we need to add to our head in the index, and it's meta information to make sure that our website looks the same on desktop and mobile. And you usually write it like this. For now I would just recommend copying it. It's going to become clearer and clearer as you get through the code what all of this means. So we're going to use a name viewport. The content has the value of width equals device width, and the initial scale is 1.0. And now it should look the same on desktop and mobile versions. Step 19. We're back to our styles.css and we're going to add more of these properties. This time we're going to add a background color to the body. So we need body as a selector, background color as a property, and the value is simply brown. So some of these colors can be just named, like black, red, yellow, so the typical ones, and most browsers then know what that means. For example, Burlywood also works. It's not a color people usually know, but browsers, they know what that means. So let's change brown to Burlywood. And the background of our body is now in this light brown. Don't forget the semicolon. In this case it still works, but you might not want to mess up your code if you forget that. So always think about that. We're going to add a new element to our index, which is the div element. And to put it in easy words, this is basically a container element where you can put your content into. Let us do this. So everything, the header and the main, everything that we had in our body is now containered into our div tags. And now we can style the div in our styles.css. So we can use it as a selector. Let us add it. Curly brackets. We need to change the width. And the value is given, it's 300 pixels. And watch what happens on the right hand side. You can see that our div container is now moving a little bit to the left. And it stays there even if we resize our window. We can also write comments in CSS. In HTML, comments look like this. But you can't use the same formatting for CSS. For CSS it has these backslashes and then a star to open a comment, any other way around, so star and backslash for closing them. So watch what happens. I've just opened a comment, so everything is now commented out. I'm going to close it right here and we'll get our text aligned back, but the background color is commented out. Step 24. We want to give our div element now the background color Burlywood. So we've commented that out for the body and we're going to add it to the div, and now it becomes much more obvious what the div is compared to the body. because now the div has a different color. And here we can see the container with a width of 300 pixels. So if I change it to 400, you can see how it gets bigger. Top and bottom of this div element is defined by the content. So in this case, our H1 camper cafe and the H2 coffee. Step 25. You can also use relative values for your properties. So in this case, the width, we don't have to use 300 pixels as an absolute number. We can also use 80%. And if I resize the window, you can see that it always resizes so that it takes 80% of the space. Step 26, we want to center our div horizontally, so the container is now too far on the left hand side, because that's the default alignment. And we can use margin under margin left, margin right for that, and set it to auto. So it's going to be automatically adjusted depending on the size of your window. And here you go, it takes 80% of the width of our screen size, but it's in center now, thanks to the margin right and margin left. Step 27 introduces us to classes. So we cannot only use type selectors, so these elements in HTML, but we can also use classes and style them. So we can give, for example, these H2's coffee a different class. So if we have multiple H2's, only the ones that have the class will be affected by the styling, and it becomes clearer if we go through the next steps. The way to write it is basically the same, so nothing truly changes. Let us change the div to a menu. And now the only thing that's missing is this dot, which indicates that menu is now a class. We haven't added a class to anything, so nothing's going to change in our browser, but in step 28, we're going to apply it. So we're back in the index.html. We're going to add the menu to our div element as a class. And remember, our div was this entire element that contains the header and the main. And the way to add it is to write class equals and then the name menu. So here was our menu, and we now have the elements that the div had prior. We've added it to the class and then added a class to the div. So in case we need a new div, we can style it on its own or not give it any style at all if we don't want to. Step 29, we're going to add a background image and we're going to add it to the body. The way to write it is a little bit different compared to HTML. You just write it background image as the property and then URL and brackets. And then you add the URL. So this is what it looks like in CSS. And you can see we've got it now here in the body. And it's going to take up the entire space no matter how I resize this window. Step 30. We're going to add more items to our menu. And we are in the index.html first. And we'll add article elements. We're going to nest information into them. And it's going to be under the coffee, our H2. So every article element is supposed to contain two P elements, so two paragraphs. One for the name, in this case French vanilla, and one for the price, which is 3.00. And here it is with the default style of paragraphs. And this is one article. We're going to create multiple of them in the next step. So we need 4 more. Let's just copy and paste it. Alright, let's move on to step 33. And we're going to work with classes now to style all of them. The first class that we're going to create is the flavor class, and we're going to add it to the P elements that have the name. In this case, the first one is French vanilla. And once again, we write it like this: class equals then the name, in this case flavor. We haven't defined any styles for this class. Let's get back to the styles.css and do it. Dot flavor, this was the way to create it in CSS, curly brackets. Now we need our property text-align and the value left. We can also center it. Nothing's going to happen as this is the default style, but if we make it left, the name French vanilla jumps to the left. So here's our P element that has the class flavor, and this is the style that's going to be applied to it. So if I change it to right, it does this. Step 35. We want to align the price to the right, and we're going to give these P elements a different class name, which is called price. In the next step, we're going to style this class and make it a text-align right. So dot price, curly brackets, text-align, and then right as a value. Watch what happens to 3.00. It jumps to the right hand side. Step 37. For now, we've got different lines for our name and the price. That's because P elements always give you a new line. We want to bring it to the same line. So we want to turn these block level elements, which are paragraph elements by default, into inline elements. And we're going to do it by creating another class. And we're going to add that class to our article. So the article contains both paragraphs. And we're going to call this class item. And then the next step, 38, we're going to style them. So here it is. And we're going to style it, dot item, curly brackets, but we only want to affect the paragraphs in it. So I have to do something else on top, but first let us add display and an inline block. So that has helped us a little bit, but we also have to add a P after the class to make sure that we only affect the paragraphs. So if we write it like this, we will only affect paragraphs that contain the class item. And this looks like we're getting somewhere. Step 39. problem is that it's now all on the left and we want to put it to the right. So let us change for flavor and price our width, and we can set it to 50%. Remember, in the index.html, French Vanilla had the flavor class and 3.00 had the price class. So that hasn't really helped us. In step 40, we're going to have a look at it and we're going to change the width from 50% to 49 and watch what happens then. And now we are in the same line, but they're very far apart from one another. And we also have a little bit of spacing to the right hand side. And to solve that issue, we are supposed to get rid of all of these blank spaces between the p elements in our index. So right here, we press the delete key. Step 42, we can now change the width back to 50%. And now we've gotten rid of this little bit of spacing on the right hand side. So that's way better. Now we only got to bring them together. But first we're going to add all of this to the other articles. So we need our classes. And this is what classes are for. You don't have to style all of them again. Instead, you'll just have to add the classes. So let us add the item class to all of the articles that we've got. Step 44. Now we'll have to get rid of the blank space between the p elements within the articles. And you can see that gets rid of our little spacing right here. Step 45, we also have to add our flavor and price classes, like we did for French Vanilla and 3.00. Step 46. Let us move our window and you can see that the name jumps from one line to two lines because we've set the width to 50%, but the names are usually longer than our prices. So we can change that from 50/50 to 75 and 25. All of the names had the class flavor, so we'll add the 75 right here. And all of the prices had our price class, so that's 25%. And now it jumps from one line to two lines later. Step 47. We're going to add another section. Step 48. We need another H2. As I've said, we can have multiple H2s on a website, but be careful with using multiple H1s. We're going to add more articles. And we want to have the same formatting so we can directly give them the class item, because it's going to look the same as our coffee articles. Let's add some P elements and give it text already. We've got donut and a price, which is 150. And we can already write it like this, so the P, these paragraph elements are on the same line and there's no blank space in between. So now it looks exactly like the ones above. We're going to need more classes. We can keep the price class, but we're going to create a new class for our desserts. We already have added our item class to the paragraph elements right here. And that has this effect. And now in step 51, we're going to add the classes to our P elements within the article for desserts. So we're going to use price and dessert. Price has already styled it, as we have given it a style in our styles.css, but we need to do something about the dessert class. In step 52 we're going to do it. And it's basically the same as we did for our flavor. The easiest way to write it is just use a comma, then dot, and dessert. So you can write it like this for class as well, and not just these selectors. And now we've styled this paragraph dessert donut, just like the ones above for the coffee. Step 53, we're going to add more articles, 3 more. Let me just copy paste most of it. And we're ready to move on to step 54. We're introduced to padding properties. So just like margin, we can use padding in all 4 directions. So left, right, top, down. And the way to write it is almost exactly the same. We're going to add the padding to our menu class. And the menu class is given to our div container. So it's going to affect this entire brown rectangle. Padding left, 20 pixels. And you can see what it did. So it has given us a little bit of space in between the text and our background image. We'll do the same for the right hand side. And move on to step 55. This time we're going to add it to top and down. And it's written like this: padding top 20 pixels and padding bottom also 20 pixels. watch what happens at the bottom of our burly wood container. As all of these padding directions have the same value, we don't have to write it like this. We can just write padding and then equals 20 pixels. Step 57. We can also determine a max width for our window. So for now, our menu, so the div container has a width of 80% of the screen size. And we make it bigger and you can see it's always 80%. But now the names and the prices are very far apart from one another. We can set a max width to our menu class and it's going to be added to our div container. Let us add it right here, max width equals 500 pixels. And now if I resize my window and make it really big, you can see that at some point it switches from 80% of the screen size to 500 pixels. Let's change the font family in our entire body. So it is going to affect all of the text that we've got in our browser window. You just write font family and then a value. We'll use sans serif. And the text has changed. Watch it again. I get rid of it. This was the default text and now I paste it. And this is sans serif text. We can use different fonts for different elements. So if we want to have our headings have a different font, we can just go to our type selectors or class selectors, whatever we need. Let us write it like this, h1, h2, curly brackets, and then font family for value we'll use impact. And it's now going to overwrite what we've got in the body, but only for the heading. So h1 and h2 are only affected and the rest is still sans serif. Step 60, we're going to add a fallback font. So sometimes browsers don't have all of these fonts, so they would fall back to the default font. But if we want to make sure that we have a different font than the default font as a fallback, we can add it like this with the comma. So after impact, we'll add the serif. So if the browser wouldn't have the impact font, the serif would be used. The established 2020 in our header is going to be styled now, and we're going to give it a class. It's called established. Font style, and we'll make it italic as a value. We haven't added the class yet, so nothing is changing in the browser window. In step 62, we're going to get back to the index.html, find the established 2020, it's a paragraph right here, and we're going to give it a class established. And this should make it italic. Step 63. We're going to change the size of our headings. I know they have different sizes, right? Let me check it. So font size. So h1 and h2 have a different font size. So let me only make it h1, font size 40 pixels. And the h2s are supposed to get 30. So I copy this one, paste it, and then change this one to h2 and make it 30 pixels. Step 64. We're going to add a footer to our index.html. You already know this from the first walkthrough, so it's nothing new. It's going to be added after the main. Here's the closing tag, and footer has opening and closing tags. Let's move on to step 65 and add some elements to our footer. We need a paragraph and a link, so an anchor element is nested. This is the text, visit our website. Don't forget the closing tag, and we are going to give it this link, and the way to write it was href, and the value was this URL. And you can see it now at the bottom of your website on the right hand side. Another p element is needed, and it's nested in the footer. This is simply text and not a link. Step 67, we're going to use an HR element, which is a horizontal line. And we're going to add it right here after the header, so after our h1 and the established. It is self-closing, so you can just write it like this. We can also style these lines. We'll get back to our styles.css, add the HR curly brackets, and we'll change the height of it and make it 3 pixels. Now it looks different. So this was what it looked like by default. And if we add 3 pixels, it looks like this. We can also change its color. Let us make it brown. Step 70. We not only have a background color, it also has a border color. And we're going to change that color right here. We'll give it the same color as the background color, so it's brown. Step 71. We're now going to change the height once again, as the width of the line doesn't just have 3 pixels, it has 3 pixels plus the size of the edges, which is by default 1 pixel. So in this case it's 3 plus 2 times 1, that makes it 5 pixels. And if we want to change it to 4, we'll need to change the height to 2. So it's 2 for the height, and then 2 times 1 pixel for the edges. Step 72, another HR element is needed, and it should be between the main and the footer, so right here. Once again, it's self-closing, and you can see it's automatically styled like the first HR. Let's move on to step 73. And we're going to add some padding to our body element. If we write it like this, it's going to be added in all directions. And that's going to put the container a little bit more in center and gives it more space with the background image. So this was what it looked like before. And if I edit, you can see especially at the top that there's now more room. Step 74. Now we're going to close the gaps between the names of our coffee and desserts and the prices. And we can use our classes for that. So just as a reminder, we've used the item class for the articles, and we've used them for coffee and dessert. Let me find it. Here it is. Here's our item class applied to the paragraphs. And we can add it to it. Margin top, 5 pixels. And margin bottom as well. Watch what happens. So all of these lines, they get a little bit closer to one another. Same for margin bottom. Let's continue with step 75. We're going to change the font size, and we're still in our item class, and we're going to affect only the paragraphs. So let's just edit here, font size equals 18 pixels. And again, it's this item class that's added to all articles. So everything except for the H2s or header and the footer is affected. Step 76. We're going to look at the margins once more, but in this case it's the margins for the HR, so our horizontal lines. And we're going to define a class for that. We'll call it bottom line, margin top 25 pixels, and we're going to add this class now to the HR at the bottom, so where our footer is, and it's going to get this style in. Let's find it. Alright, there it is, just below the main, on above the footer. And all we have to do is to write class equals bottom line. Step 78. We're going to style the footer element now, but at first we'll write a comment that this is now the footer. And remember, this is the way to write comments in CSS. We use footer as a selector, property font size and value 40 pixels. So we've made it a little bit smaller. Step 80. We can also change the color of links. You may have noticed that depending on if a link is clicked or not, or if you hover on top of it, they look different, they get a different color. And we can target all of that in CSS. Let us first change the color of the link itself. Without hovering or clicking, we'll make it black. So this was the original color and it's black. Step 81. After a link has been clicked, it's called visited, and we can change its color as well in CSS. And we'll write it like this, so a _visited, and then it's the usual game. So we add the property and the value. Now we're going to target the color of the hovering. So if we hover over it, it's going to change to brown now. And we're going to change the color of when it's active. So this is the moment where it's actually being clicked. And we're going to make it white. So watch what happens if I click it. It looks white for a split second. And this is the active part of the link. Step 84. We're going to change the colors a little bit. We can move on to step 85. And we're going to change the spacing right here for our H1. In the styles, we've already created a selector for that. We've changed the font size. And now we only have to add a margin. And we'll make it 0. Watch what happens on the right hand side. I'll get rid of it. There's lots of space. I'll add it. And we've gotten this space much smaller. Step 86. We also change the margin at the bottom. So this is the spacing between our H1 and the established right here. Step 87. We're going to add a new class. We're going to call it address. And we're going to change its margin bottom. In step 88, we're going to apply this class to the p element containing the address. And this right here. In our footer, it's the last paragraph. And it's going to get this style. So watch what happens to the last line if I add it. So we've gotten rid of a little bit of space at the bottom below it. Step 89. We're going to add some more images. We want to have it below our H2s, in this case the coffee first. We are in the index.html, so that's stuff that we already know. We'll add an img tag, it's self-closing, alt is given, it's called coffee icon. This is already displayed right here. And let me now add a source. And it's this one. But it's on the left hand side, so we want to change that and put it in center. So we're back to our styles.css and we're going to change the style of the img tag. So we'll use that as a selector. We'll change display to block. And now we'll change the margin left and margin right, and we'll set it to auto. Now it's in center. And you can see we've used the display property before. And we can move on to step 91. We'll add an image under desserts as well. And as we used image as a selector, it's going to be affected directly by the styling, so we don't need a class or anything. Just add the source right here. And we need an alt text, which is pi icon. Again, image tags are self-closing. Step 92. The spacing between the H2 and our images looks a little bit odd. We can affect the H2s or the images, but in this case it's easier to affect the images and give it a negative value of margin top -25. So you can also use negative values for most of these properties. And we are through with the second part of this responsive web design course on freecodecamp. As always, I suggest that you go through these exercises yourself, and only if you get stuck, refer to my walkthrough. I'm going to link to freecodecamp in the description of this video below. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.